Socialism always fails, and the reason why is because it turns markets and the powers that citizens have in their economies over to a centralized power, and that centralized power never knows how to handle the economy as well as millions of individuals and millions of private businesses. I'm Tommy Stone, and this is episode 2 of why socialism sucks in America and why we need to fix it and get rid of it completely. And I'm not here to completely defend every aspect of American capitalism. Right now, I believe that we're living in a crony capitalist society because we let our capitalism go unregulated and unchecked, where our big corporations have now turned their economic power into political power. And our politicians right now are unwilling to change the laws to make that impossible. And I think that is a huge, huge failure of the American system, and not only the American system, but specifically of the Supreme Court. Because the Supreme Court has ruled multiple times, at least 5 separate times, to give big corporations First Amendment rights in elections to be able to pay off for politicians. And that is absolutely ridiculous. That needs to be fixed. But that is a whole other subject for another video. The reason why we're talking about socialism today is because, like what I said, it destroys all private business. People don't understand. Capitalism, again, has its problems, but competition is the most important part about markets. What competition does and why it's so important in capitalism is because it destroys and weeds out bad companies. What socialism does not do is it takes every single company and it gives it over to a centralized power, again, like the government. Every single time it is the government. It turns out when people say, oh, it's going to be the means of production for the workers, well, the workers don't ever actually get that power. It always goes over to the government because for some reason people think the government is them every single time, that the federal government perfectly represents them and will do every single thing that they want and will do it completely uncorruptedly. This is a complete nonsense. It's a complete fallacy, because the main issue is how, if you get rid of the power, the capitalists currently have, again, the so-called capitalists, if you get rid of all their power, all of their money, and you turn it over now to the socialists and the socialist power and the socialist central planners, how are the new socialist central planners now not going to act the same corrupted way as the capitalists right now? And the only issue with that is that the capitalists worked for their capital. They know how the economy works. They know how business works, while the socialists just got it out of revolution. They have no idea how to actually work with that capital and how to actually use it to create a functioning economy. And that is my big issue with socialism. Is you can complain all you want about capitalism. Again, it has its issues, but capitalism allows for you to regulate it. Capitalism allows for you to alter free markets and not turn them into monopolies, because, again, the beauty of capitalism is it embraces free markets. We don't have to just completely let free markets run rampant. Again, we can regulate them. That is why we have the Sherman Antitrust Act. We have seen America regulate capitalism a dozen different times. But my issue with that is that socialism does not allow for any type of regulation. In fact, when there is corruption in a socialistic society, again, the people in government decide where you live, where you work, where you eat, where you go to the hospital. If there's corruption in any of those fields, who do you report it to? Law enforcement or police, usually. But again, if those are the government as well, all of a sudden you're just telling the government they're doing a corrupt job, and that always falls on deaf ears, and that is what we've seen countless times in history. And not only do these central planners become corrupt every single time, but the hyper-productivity that socialism needs to create equality for all and to create abundant resources that we can just freely give out to everybody, you need hyper-productivity. And a central planning system does not allow for that. And the best example is the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union took over all farmland systems across the USSR, guess what happened? It was mass famines, because when you take private business out of the equation, all of a sudden you have no idea how every single little facet and every single little piece of farmland operates. Again, when you are operating at a massive scale, there is a ton of nuance, and that nuance can only be handled at an individual level. And when you get rid of the individual's power in an economy and you give it up to the government, those situations that arise at an individual level simply cannot be handled. And that is why famines arise. And that is why when you force people to give up their private property and you force people to give up profit incentives, they are not going to work as hard. No matter how a socialist frames it, where you're giving the means of production back to the people, and because of that they're going to be more productive and they're going to want to work because they're getting the incentive to work, they're missing a whole part of that, is buying the equipment, taking up all of the risk to go and create the farm, to go and buy the seeds, to go and get the other farmers to help you create to do the harvest. Again, there's a lot of risk behind business, and what socialism doesn't account for is that workers are all of a sudden to get all of the benefits benefit from that risk without taking on any of that risk. And that is what is the nonsense of it. If a farm fails, then guess what? The person who owns the farm also fails. They lose a ton of money. The worker on the farm is only losing their wage. They aren't losing any of the investment that was put into the farm. Again, there's a huge difference between somebody who's just working on a farm, somebody who owns the farm, who's put investment in, got the investors, made it up to tax code, is finding out the connections to get the food to market. Again, there's a whole lot of differences. That's why socialism doesn't work, because people in business are not equal. And that is my big issue with socialism, is it guarantees the wrong type of equality, an equality that can never, ever be achieved. And that is the equality of outcomes. Capitalism guarantees the equality of opportunity, where everybody in a free market has the same opportunity to rise up, be successful, and also has the same chance of their company failing. Under socialism, that is completely destroyed, where everything, again, is under the government. You lose all ability to become an entrepreneur and start your own business and make the profit that you actually see from the labor. You don't receive any fruits of your labor in socialism, because all of the profit goes to the government to be redistributed to the other workers who didn't work as hard. Again, a CEO is paid the same amount as a person on a factory just putting a pencil together. That is ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense, because the person who put together the factory got together the people and the labor and the resources and the capital in order to get that pencil made. That is a completely different job that gets rewarded at a much higher rate. And without that reward basis, without that reward system, and essentially that profit incentive, nobody will create business anymore in your country. We've seen this countless times. Again, the Soviet Union is the best example. When you take away all of your farmers' rights, they will no longer just produce for a system that they cannot profit off of, and you will have massive famines. Another thing I don't understand how socialists don't see is when you get rid of people's private property, private business, and their incentive to make any sort of money, and actually when you take away all of their money and you give it to a government or the people to redistribute, you come up with the biggest fallacy of all time. How does one group of people know how to redistribute all wealth in America for people better than individuals do themselves? And again, the best part about free markets is you work for what you earn. You work for what you get. Everything that you have around you is earned by your labor. And even the people who are nepo babies, again, their parents had to use their labor in some sort of way to gain the money that they have. And that is what socialism completely destroys, is you get rid of that incentive where you can have capital for yourself. You can save money. Everything is given to you by the government. Even, again, down to your food. Even your farms are controlled in socialism by the government. And there is no different way this goes. So people always say that that was a different form of socialism. That was just authoritarianism. But what they fail to understand is that every single time, socialism leads to that form of control. Because you cannot just have people all voluntarily give up their stuff, give up their money, and want to give it to people for free who didn't work for it, who have not worked as hard, and have not learned how to use capital and labor as effectively as other people. That is what free markets do, is they punish people who don't know how to use the markets and how to get into business correctly. And that might, to some people, again, people don't want to work for things nowadays. I don't understand this whole mindset of wanting free stuff. You have to work for every single thing in this world. Things cannot just be given to you. Everything has to be earned. And that's what capitalism incentivizes the best. There is not one system ever created. Literally, you can't name one system in history that didn't have some form of hierarchy. That was before economics ever existed, was hierarchies in societies. You had people at the top who were wealthy and people at the bottom who were poor. That is just always how it has been, and no economic system has ever been able to replace that. But what capitalism does best is it gives everybody the best opportunity to rise out of that situation. Socialism puts you all on one playing field. You cannot go above, but all you can do is go down. That is the issue. The authority sets you here. You have no private property, no ability to make your own money. Every single dollar you make is given to the government. Again, it is the highest form of taxation. We are all screaming about taxation on the middle class and lower class, how we all want tax cuts, yet socialists, again, on the extreme end of people who don't want to be taxed and they want the billionaires to be taxed the most, socialism literally takes all of your money. And people then talk about Nordic countries and Sweden, and they say, oh, but what about them? Those countries all embrace free market economics, and what they do actually, they very much tax their people at a much higher rate than you would ever want. The tax bracket, the highest rate of taxes, kicks in at a much lower bracket than for Americans. And the reason why is because they're also a welfare state. America also has welfare. Socialists fail to understand that America has lots of welfare systems, the same exact systems and structures that these Nordic countries and Swedish countries have. Sorry, my thing just moved. I thought I saw something. But America has these same exact systems in place for welfare. And in fact, we give out per capita essentially the same amount. We are on par pretty much with most of these Swedish countries with how much we give to the welfare system. It's not like we can tax people more to give more to these systems and all of a sudden things will be fixed. That is not how it has ever worked. Look at the war on poverty. We've spent trillions of dollars on poverty. Look at the war on drugs. Trillions of dollars on the war on drugs. And nothing has been fixed. In fact, it has only gotten worse. That's because when you give the federal government a bunch of money, a bunch of power, and a bunch of control, every single time they end up corrupt. So the best system, and that's what capitalism is it gives the most economic power to the people, where me and you can rise up and get over these challenges. We have all of the profit incentives. If I start a business, I can make all of the money in the world. I can hire people and pay them a wage because guess what? They aren't taking up the same opportunities and risk as me. And that is the big fine line that socialism forgets, is that everything has to be created through risk. In order to start a business, you have to go and put a lot of money down. You have to go find a lot of people to work with, and that takes time, money, and risk. And a wage worker is not picking up any of that risk by going to their job. They did not buy the factory, buy the equipment for the factory. They are simply there going and doing a job. They have one skill they are applying every single day. Again, that is the big difference as an entrepreneur, somebody who is starting a company. I'm not saying they have more than one skill. Again, they could have one skill, but they focused and took the risk to make that skill scalable. That's what socialism destroys, is scalability. And I think people forget about that. Is when you look at Venezuela as well. Venezuela was a thriving, scaling country. I believe they had the fourth highest GDP per capita before socialism completely destroyed it. They had over 300 billion barrels of oil. They were literally just sitting on a gold mine of money. How do you go broke with 300 billion barrels of oil? Well, you do it through socialism. They were producing over 3 million barrels of oil a day as well. After, I believe, 30 years now, I believe the last time we've updated was like mid-2020, something like that. They're now producing under 800,000 barrels of oil a day. That is absolutely ridiculous. Now, the Trump administration, obviously, we've taken Maduro out. We're getting a ton of private investment back in there. We're destroying socialism in Venezuela. We're going to make Venezuela a thriving country again. But the reason why it failed in the first place is because socialism came over. We had a group of central planners like Maduro who became corrupt. Oh, a big surprise. Again, when you take away the power that these so-called capitalists have, which is literally me and you, the small business owners in America. You guys forget that big aspect of that. A bunch of business in America, the large majority of business in America isn't these big billionaire CEOs. There's a ton of small business. Millions and millions of Americans have started their own small businesses, restaurants, stores, anything you can name. They have started it themselves and they are making money off of that. And if you apply socialism to these small businesses as well, they all fail. Because why would a normal person decide to go take the risk, leave a wage job to go take the risk and start a company that revolutionizes an industry and changes the world? Why would anybody take that risk and where they could colossally fail, lose all of their money and everything goes to hell, when you can just sit on a wage job and have the government give you your food and your money and everything is just given to you for free? Nobody will move up. There will be no innovation. And people say, oh, but for the sake of innovation, because now people are being taken care of, they're all of a sudden going to start innovating. And all of a sudden, again, we're going to be hyper productive. That has never, ever been the case with socialism. Every single time you have to force people into socialism, they get all pissed off because you've taken away their rights, destroyed their life, destroyed their economy, given all that power to a group of people, saying it was the people and it was for giving back the means of production to the people when you were just lying the whole time. Socialism is a lie. I could seriously go on and on about the historical examples of how socialism has failed. It has literally been tried 100 times in the last 100 years, and it has an 0 for 100 record, while capitalism has produced the greatest country in the entire world, in the history of the world. America, look at what you can do. The American dream is real for one reason, because you can come here with any sort of skill, and literally, you can come here with no skills, as a matter of fact, no money, no connections, you know nobody here. You can come here from a boat, and you can start a life where you can create a company, create a life that nowhere else in the world you could achieve, where you could have success and raise a family like you can in America, and that's because of free markets. When Venezuela was freed, when Maduro was captured, they were in the streets celebrating, because guess what? Socialism sucks. Thank you all so much for watching today's episode of the Tommy Stone Show. I really appreciate it. If you guys are liking the Socialism Sucks series, please comment down below. I really think I'm going to try to continue it, and I hope it takes off. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. It really helps me when I see those numbers go up, when you guys drop me some likes, you hit me with some comments. So please like this video, share it with some friends. It really means a lot. And as always, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.